Hello everyone. So I just wanted to create a video to talk a little bit about retrieval and memory retrieval specifically. So whenever we're talking about memory retrieval, we're really talking about the process of taking information that's been stored in long-term memory and pulling it into working memory so we can access it and recall whatever it is that we're trying to remember. And so a good analogy here is if you think of long-term memory as like a warehouse, that it's calling something in that warehouse, having somebody go grab that thing in the warehouse and bring it to you so you can do whatever it is that you need to do with it. Same thing with retrieval. Basically, we have a bunch of information stored in long-term memory. Whenever we're using a retrieval process, we're trying to find that thing that's stored in long-term memory and bring it into working memory so that we can either answer the question that's being asked or provide the information that we're trying to provide or say what it is that we need to say. Now, a lot of times whenever there's failures in memory, and later in upcoming weeks we'll talk about memory failures more in depth, but really one of the most common types of memory failures is issues with retrieval. And so I'm sure you've all had this where you just blank in the moment. You're talking to somebody and there's a word and you just can't think of that word. It happens to me all the time when I'm lecturing or when I'm talking to people where I'm like, I know what this word is. It's there. For some reason, I just can't retrieve it. It's in the warehouse. I know the word. I just can't find that word at that particular moment. I also am notorious for forgetting people's names, and not only people that I've just met, but also some of my best friends where I'll just awkwardly be sitting in the car and just blank on their name suddenly. And that's just another example of a retrieval failure. I'm sure we've all had this. They show up all the time. Another common thing is I'll get somewhere, have a specific chore or something in the house that I want to do, and so I'll go to the room of wherever that chore needs to take place, and then when I get there, I can't remember why I'm there, what it is I need to do. That's another example of retrieval failure. So most common memory failures are going to be retrieval failures. It's the information's there, you just can't access it or you can't call it up at that particular moment. And so I'm sure you've all had several experiences with that. Now, from an experimental level, whenever we want to test retrieval, there are really two basic general tasks that we use. And so let me preface this slide of because there have been some issues with homework assignments, I'm referring back to a homework assignment that should have occurred but won't. So I'll talk about it a little bit more. So, ignore some of the text on here. I'll put it into perspective. But really when it comes to, as cognitive psychologists trying to study or to test recall, or retrieval, what they're going to use is they're going to use one of two memory tasks. They're either going to use what's called a recall task or a recognition task. So in the case of a recall task, basically what's going to happen is you're just going to be asked to say as much as you remember. So thinking back to a previous week when we were doing the serial position curve and I gave you a list of words and then had you recall as many words as you could think of without any prompts or cues or anything like that other than me saying, okay, recall all the words that you can think of. That's a recall task. Okay, so in the case of recall tasks, there's no cues or hints given. And so actually a lot of our examples that we've used in this class, such as the serial position curve example, or even the short-term, measuring short-term memory example where I listed off a series of numbers and you just had to recall as many of the numbers as possible. Those were all recall tasks. There's no information given, and you're just asked to give as much possible information as you can. Now, in the case of recall tasks, one of the things that they're really looking at is it's requiring you to search through your memory. So if we go back to the serial position curve example where you were given a string or a list of words and asked to recall as many of those words as possible, one of the things that you needed to do was say, okay, so let me search through my memory and try to remember what words it is that I heard and try to recall those and give them back to the researcher, or if you're doing it along with me, giving it back to me. So those are recall tasks. And the key thing here is there's no cues or hints given. Now, another type of memory retrieval task that's given in cognitive psychology studies is what's called a recognition task. And basically, in the case of recognition, what happens is that you're given a series of items, and then you're asked to say which of these items was it that you saw during the memory task. So a good example of this in the homework assignment that I usually have students do is they get a mock lineup for some sort of a crime. And so they see pictures of 10 faces. and then a little bit of time elapses, and then they're shown individual pictures. And your task is basically to say, was this person on the top 10 most wanted list or were they not? And so you need to identify who did you see on the previous list. Or another way that I might do this is I might, instead of doing the serial position curve, I give you a list of words and then I basically present those words one at a time, and you have to make some sort of a decision, such as, was this word on the list or was it not? And so here, you just have to recognize whether you've seen something or recognize whether something is in memory or not. And so the term that we use are learned items for items that we did see during whatever it was that we were asked to remember, and distractors. Distractors are just things that you were never presented with whatsoever, and they're there just to distract you so that you can't say, yes, I saw all of the things in memory. So they're things you've never seen before. Again, to tie this to the word list, it would be like me giving you random words that weren't on the word list and asking you to say if you saw those words on the word list or not. Now, in the case of recognition, you get what are called retrieval cues. Because you're just looking at saying something and saying, okay, did I see that before or did I not? You're basically getting a cue to help you retrieve that memory. In other words, have I seen this before or have I not? And so we'll talk a little bit more about retrieval cues, but I want to go back and just kind of put recall and recognition tasks in perspective. So as college students, you're very, very familiar with these two types of memory tasks. So I just want you to take a second and think for yourself, when might I experience recall tasks and when might I experience recognition tasks in the course of me being a college student? And I'll give you just a second to think about that. Now, one of the things that you may have noticed is that anytime you're given a multiple choice test, that's going to be a recognition task, right? Because the right answer's there, and you just have to choose the right answer, the learned item, and differentiate it from the distractor so that you can say, yes, I know this is the correct answer because this is what I remembered learning in the course. And so multiple choice tests are a great example of recognition tasks. There, you know the answer's there, you just have to choose the right answer. Now, essay tests are going to be examples of recall tasks. In that particular case, you're just write everything that you know about, well, that's not the way that essays should go, but a lot of times it becomes write everything that you know about this one particular topic. There's no cues or anything to help you remember that information. You just have to list off everything it is that you remember. And so we're all quite familiar with this with recall tasks like essay exams and recognition like multiple choice exams. Now, earlier I had said I was going to come back and talk a little bit about retrieval cues, and I want to define what retrieval cues are. So whenever we use the term retrieval cues, we're really talking about words or other stimuli that help us remember information that's stored in our memory. And so a good example of this, I'm sure if you've ever either gone back to your hometown, or if you've moved at any point in your life and you've gone back to the original place where you grew up, one of the things that happens is when you go back to those places, you get hit with a flood of memories. And so Old Han here is just any place that you used to hang out or has some sort of an importance to you. But when you go to that spot, usually what ends up happening is that place serves as a retrieval cue. As soon as you're in that place, you just get hit with a flood of memories. You may not have thought about these for a long period of time, but being in that particular place has really cued the retrieval of all these memories. And so they all come back to you at that particular moment. Similarly, so earlier I had mentioned the situation where I go into a room to do some chore, and by the time I get to the room, I forget what the chore that I intended to do was. Now, one of the things that people typically do to help themselves remember is they go back to where they originally had the thought. And so let's say I'm in my kitchen when I decided whatever that chore was, and so I walk back to the kitchen, and then often what happens is as soon as we're in the kitchen or wherever we had that thought, it comes back to us, and we're like, oh, yes, that's right. I needed to I don't know, dust the room, or I don't know what my chore would be. But one of the, usually when we have those instances where we get somewhere and we're like, hold on, what was it that we were doing? What's going on? Then if we go back to the original place, that place serves as a retrieval cue where we had the thought, and we say, oh, okay, now I remember what it was that I was intending to do. Also, you probably had this experience too with things like music, smells, taste. It's not really specific to a particular sensory thing or a location or anything like that, right? Anything can serve as a retrieval cue, but often if you hear an old familiar song that maybe was your song with your first boyfriend or girlfriend, then you might think of them anytime that you hear that song. Or there might be particular smells that you associate with different people in your life, and so whenever you smell that smell, that serves as a retrieval cue and it brings back or it triggers those memories that you had. And so it's not sensory or location or anything specific. Retrieval cues can be anything, but the key thing here is that whenever we experience them, hear them, see them, whatever it is, they help us to remember information stored in memory.